So
Is it
we're
on?
going to go ahead and continue then with the conversation this evening. Thank you again, Dan, and for making my introduction of Leroy a lot easier with your comments towards the end. Leroy has been here in Goshen, practicing as a professor of political science at Goshen College and serving the community as an attorney at present. Has been here for almost 50 years as a resident of Goshen. I certainly haven't known Leroy that long, although I've known him about as long as I've known my wife through their friendship over the years, and so I've appreciated that connection and have been really grateful for the chance to see how you have served the community in many ways here. We had the privilege of sitting down earlier this week and chatting for a while about some of the potential talking points or ideas that we might want to touch on here this evening. But given the fact that we have this presentation to reflect on, I first wanted to just give you the opportunity to comment on anything that has stood out from the presentation to you, and just really leave it open for you to take this wherever you would prefer.
Yeah, I just briefly, of course, Dan said some things that I hadn't heard before, but I was basically familiar with it. I think that what is significant for me is that, we were quite elated, after the passage of this resolution. It was extraordinary. But then, of course, you recognize that, as in all things in American society, over the question of race, there's going to be a pushback, and there's this, it's some kind of retrenching, and we've seen that subsequently to that event. There's been a pushback. People thought that you went too far, and so on. And I think that is the way race is dealt with in the United States. You can see the pattern. The Civil War supposedly was supposed to resolve this question of slavery. And you're all familiar with Lincoln, the Spielberg movie, how Lincoln was really adamant about, we're going to get this 13th Amendment. He did it. And just a couple of decades afterwards, the Supreme Court limited the impact of the 13th Amendment, along with the 14th and 15th Amendments, their interpretation of it. So it returned, so that the country returned to what a writer in the 20th century would later call slavery by another name. And so we have this process, this progress, retrenchment pattern. And the question, of course, is what are we facing these days? Now, I think that with the ascendancy of Kavanaugh to the bench, we're in one of those retrenching periods. The attack on the Voting Rights Act, with Clarence Thomas's decision, helping to do that, it's ironical. And so those are the kinds of things that we are going to be continuously facing. But I also think that there's a profound, what shall I call that? I'm not sure what it is. I think about the statement that Frederick Douglass once made in a speech that he gave on the occasion of the 4th of July, where he was called upon to speak, and some of you are familiar with that speech, in which he said, he reminded white Americans that black people, their destiny was intricately bound up with, inseparable from the destiny of white people, that we will go forward as a testimony for or against this people. And I think that that is what American history is about. And the stories, and Goshen's story is kind of like a microcosm of the pictures that you saw the police men and their regalia, and they looking as, really law enforcement guys, whatnot. That understanding of what Goshen is about, and the statement that, what was it, 1930 statement, 1936, that there are no Negroes here. It's got 2.5% of non-American whites, and then the 97.5 whites, and then so we have no crime here, or very little or no crime, suggesting, of course, that crime comes with black people. That is a rejection, in a sense, of America itself, because African Americans, whether we admit it or not, many of us do, is that we have been created by the society. This is who we are. And you will see that nationalism reflected in many, many declarations by African Americans. The fact is that with the creation of the United States, African Americans' creation of our identity it's on the same trajectory, you see. And so my view of the matter is that when white people in the United States can come to embrace the idea of negritude as being synonymous with America, then we will have crossed over. Until that time, it's a battle within oneself, its own identity. That's my reflection on it. And I think that Goshen's, the statement itself was exemplary, because we found a critical majority of our leaders at that moment in time found themselves able to cross over. So that's why I would say. Is that? Sorry to talk so.
No, that's fine. This is an opportunity this is why we wanted to have you here, why that was something that Dan emphasized from the start, that if we were going to do this presentation, that we needed to have this dialogue, and that dialogue needed to include both of you, who having collaborated to help make the resolution happen. I guess you, in the statement that you read, or that had been quoted from your remarks to the council, you talked about freedom as this fundamental value that compels us to respond both to the history and the need to address that history here now. What is it about the nature of our response in terms of how we embrace that history and in terms of how we move forward that you would hope can be seen in that response today?
Well, I think that historically, Americans have defined the United States as a white man's country, okay? That's on the one hand. On the other hand, there's this monument that the French, for somehow or another, I'm not sure what possessed them to do this, but I don't know the entire story, but they gave us this monument, and it stands in the harbor out there. I still, unless the hurricane blows it down sometime, I don't think it ever has, but it's still out there in the harbor with those words, and give me your, and so on. And sometimes I wonder if Stephen Miller has read that and what does it mean, that is the contradiction. That is the paradox. The United States would deign to assert we are a society unlike any other in the world. All others were created out of indigenous forces warring and whatnot. But we were created as a new society from the beginning. We are going to create a nation that's going to be exemplary, and it's going to be different. And in addition to that, we are God ordained. I mean, so we are destined to be this. So you say this is who we are. On the other hand, you say so when I, as a black person, I take that to be serious stuff. It's a promise. Martin Luther King said it, a blank check. We got this check. We want to cash it in now. This is a negotiable instrument here. And so we're asking for justice. That's always been the rhetorical refrain from the black community, I think. What about us? You've forgotten something, haven't you? For all of your professions. So I think, or my sense is that as white people define themselves, or they conceive of themselves as being American, and what constitutes Americans, genuine Americanism, if it does not include black people or people of color, it is deficient, and it portends trauma and conflict and lack of resolution, incapacity to move beyond, and we become subject. I mean, other societies have had this kind of problem before, and it will continue. I'm thinking of the Balkans. I don't think in the Balkans you've ever had any concept that we are going to be, this is one union and this kind of universalism, or that we profess here. So you could become, the society here could become similar to what you find in those kinds of countries. Balkanization and conflict, rife ethnic strife and conflict. But if you want to become a cohesive society, white people must embrace the concept of America as a society of people of all colors. It is, I think, a unique struggle for white people. Black people, we have our struggles too, of course. Louis Farrakhan is one of those. It represents that reality. But the black Muslims, their own identity has been forged because of the lack of resolution, the inability of white America to, as I said, cross over. So I think that is the struggle that we have. That's what white people must do. We black people, we're like anybody else. We are biased. We have our own racism. Okay? Black Africans helped to get us over here. Our slavery was a collusion between black Africans and white Europeans. I mean, that's the story. But I think that that is our job as African Americans, is to continue to assert our identity, and yet at the same time take the attitude that Martin Luther King Jr. gave to us in his life and in his death as an example of how we should go forward. That's a lot of words. I'm sorry.
One other aspect of this evening that I want to take a moment to acknowledge, which is on the back of your bulletins or your programs, is the the effort to take a lot of the information and the research that helps us understand this history and these dynamics better, that Dan has compiled in the course of preparing for this evening, and organize it into an archive that can provide a foundation for people that want to dive in deeper and want to learn more moving forward. And so we've been fortunate to have Nishan Laura and Elijah Laura as interns from Goshen College working with us to try to help develop that archive and do a lot of that that compiling and cataloging. That isn't quite ready. We hope to have it publicly ready soon on the page that's listed on the back. But they have been able to explore a lot of the materials themselves in the process of researching it, and I wanted to give them an opportunity to either identify any questions that have stood out to you that you want to take this opportunity to ask, or else we can open it up to any questions then that you might have for Leroy or Dan.
Thank you. I'm Elijah. One thing that I encountered when I was looking through a lot of this data was some really ugly, nasty pieces of history. And one question that I had that either of you could address is how you go about not only engaging that history, but bringing it out and publicizing it in a way that allows people to be educated and not just turned off.
Well, it goes back in some way to what Mandela and Tutu said in '94. It is so easy to turn a blind eye to what has happened before. And even several times as we were making our presentations and we were being quoted in the newspaper and so forth, we got the retrenchment, we got the pushback of, why are you dredging up all this ancient history, all this old stuff? This was in the 40, 50 years ago or something. And we, even at that initial meeting in November of 2014 with the CRC, there were at least one or two comments to that effect. Why not just forget all this and move on? And what Mandela and Tutu said was that truth-telling precedes reconciliation. And these ugly, painful documents, these stories, you can take it to another level. Killings, including lynchings, these things happened. And I mentioned Martinsville as the most researched town by Dr. Lowen. And the reason Martinsville had even more notoriety than Goshen was because in 1968, an African-American young woman named Carol Jenkins was selling encyclopedias to put herself through Indiana University, just south of there. But she made the mistake of working a little bit too long in this sundown town. She saw this car following her and she got worried, and so she went into this house and knocked on the door of this white couple, and they had, I think, maybe bought some encyclopedias from her earlier, or at least had a nice chat with her, and she was concerned, and it was getting toward dark, and so she asked for refuge there, and they were kind enough and they were ready to be with her and help her in any way they could for like a half hour. But then she felt like she had imposed on them long enough, so she went out and was heading to her car, just parked a couple blocks away, and one of the men in the car got out and stabbed her to death with a screwdriver, and they found her body just a half a block from this couple's home because she had violated Martinsville's sundown legacy and policy. So there are things that have happened in, even in Indiana, maybe sometimes especially in Indiana, I think the last Indiana lynching was in 1930 in Muncie. And so it's not unique to the South. And that's one thing I think I've discovered in my research is that racism is alive and well, all over the country, all over the world. And what we can do is try to light a candle instead of curse the darkness.
Well, it's kind of hard to know what to do in a given situation. Let me put it this way. I think there are a lot of white people who are put on the defensive when we black people talk about lynchings and talk about how we've been treated. The historical record is clear. I mean, you can't argue with it. I just recently I think in Birmingham, Alabama, there's a guy by the name of Brian Stevens. You heard of him. Brian has helped to put together this memorial on lynching, right in the heart of Dixie. You see his story in Montgomery, yeah, and Alabama, and those stories are not going to go away. I mean, they're part of the fabric of history. It's almost as if I think white people lived and performed and acted as though there would be no repercussions. Everything could be forgotten. But life isn't lived that way. And so I think that one needs to tell these stories. I think we can try to be as sympathetic as we can, and yet, as Brian Stevenson is, he's telling it, but he's understanding of the pain that it causes. But listen, if you're going to embrace the U.S. as the land of the free and the home of the brave and all of those good things, then you must embrace the downside. You see, you can't play with history like that. You must be honest, and so I'm glad that we have a press, a vibrant press that forces us to recognize that people aren't always pretty, that the story is not always angelic. It's devilish. And so I think that we can have empathy for people, but we must tell the story.
Just to add something that I heard you say, Leroy, in our planning meeting yesterday, the phrase paradoxical reality really struck me when you mentioned that. You said this country has been a paradoxical reality for a long time, and it continues to be.
I think that is uniquely American. And why do I think that? Because I don't recall the British ever saying that we're going to we're going to be open arms to everybody. Rather, it's Her Majesty's government shall be pervasive over the entire world, and we shall spread British civilization. Civilization, I say, real civilization. It's the British don't promise that. The French had their civilizing tendencies in Vietnam and in other places. Mission civilisatrice, and the Japanese, I don't think, had ever tried to. They wouldn't even dream of trying to suggest that their societies are open to everybody. I don't know any society that makes this profession the way the Americans do. Okay, that is our unique role in the world. We're having trouble right now with a president who says, no, it's America first. I mean, these contradictions, people are, no. The people from Latin America said, but look, we look to you. We look to you. You're the example. So, well, why? Well, because you taught us to expect that of you. It's a promise. Okay? That's the point. I mean, I don't know how we can say it. How one can say it any other way. That's the reality. To the extent that we can embrace jazz, the creation of a uniquely American music. If you watch Ken Burns, for example, his jazz, there's a place in one of those episodes where he says, in New York City or some other place, the big time music intellectuals and what were gathering together and trying to figure out what is the course of America's American music, what it will take, what course it will take. And of course they were thinking of Brahms and the European tradition and all of that. And he says, in the meantime, Louis Armstrong was playing his trumpet in New Orleans. And that is the music that America is uniquely known for. That is a genre. You see? It was Satchmo Armstrong. I mean, he was a genius. Wasn't Beethoven, but Armstrong. Now, the question is, can Americans, white Americans, embrace Satchmo the way they've embraced Beethoven? That is the question. And I say, I think that we're stronger for it if we can. Look at all the creativity in this country from the various sources of people who've come from all parts of the world. Here, I'm amazed at it. Every time I turn on the television or something, I'm seeing all these people. You see, amazing stories. Bennett Amalu, you ever heard of him? Bennett Amalu has taught us something about football, American style football, even though he didn't know what it was in the beginning. When he did the surgery on Mike Webster's brain, and he found out about CTE, and ever since then, American football has been undergoing change. A Nigerian. That's the reality. You've got it right. Diversity. Something good about diversity. Let us embrace it. Sorry.
No, thank you. We both appreciate it. I think everybody in the room appreciates it. I'm Nishan, but just to reiterate. Throughout the work and looking at all the documents that Dan gave us, one thing that stuck out to me, even though these were ugly times and some of the documents that we did encounter were very ugly, we also did encounter documents of allies and people doing the work of diversity. Churches. At one point we found a newspaper article from Ray Keim, who is father of Professor Paul Keim at Goshen College, if you guys are familiar, talking about how Goshen needs to...
A letter to the editor,
Yeah.
that Ray Keim wrote back in the early 60s.
Yeah. To include everybody in Goshen and to welcome diversity. And Dan had mentioned, and Leroy can confirm, that he came in the late 60s, correct?
Yeah.
To Goshen.
69.
Yeah. And unlike some of people, including Ray Keim, who did, he had no choice but to experience some of these things. As white people, you can just ignore it, or you have a choice to say, well, this is not my problem. So my question is to Leroy, because we've heard a lot of general, okay, this is what happened. What kept you in Goshen doing some of this work, and what kept you fighting this good fight, instead of just saying, you know what, I'm going to go to Elkhart, or I'm going to go to South Bend?
Well, in a way, I did, as you suggest, I did make a separation from Goshen College. I struggled at the college on the faculty, okay? The subject matter, government, political, and politics, was not something that you would concentrate on if you want to really have a permanent fixture at Goshen College, and it just doesn't happen, okay? And I felt the as an outsider there for entire period that I was there. About 25 years of that 40-year period, I worked part-time, and then I did my full-time practice. And the only time that I had that was really recreational time was on a Friday evening. I was going because I taught 4 classes a year. And my attitude was that this institution belonged to the people who created it. It was my choice. I could have gone someplace else. One of my professors at Notre Dame suggested that I not go down that path. So once I had done it, well, then I decided I needed to make a change, because Goshen College, I was not a central part of. I was not a critical faculty member of the college. Okay, and I could understand that. I was negotiable, and so that's why I used what resources that were available to me to chart a legal career, so that I could take care of my family. Once the doors of future college teaching had been closed to me, and so once the children came, then this was home. My daughter, youngest daughter, she loved Goshen. You're going to move. This is home, man. We built a house, and so that's.
Tell that story of when coming back from.
Oh yeah, we were coming back from law school one Christmas. We were on Christmas break, and our youngest daughter, Ann, some of you know Ann, and she was. We were getting close to Elkhart County. She was saying, "When are we getting to Goshen?" And I just smiled at her. I said, "You love Goshen, don't you?" She said, "Yes." And then she began to chant, "Goshen, Goshen, Goshen." This is home. They were born in a hospital over here, at the hospital down the road there. Their friends were here. This is the place. So that's what kept me here, because I wanted to see my children grow. I grew up as a migrant farm worker. We moved from place to place. And I wanted to see my children have a permanent place. And we have. They grew up they've grown up in the same house, has been in the same place for 40 years.
I was reaching for the mic because Leroy told that story just before the city council voted to approve the resolution of his daughter's love for Goshen, and how, yes, Goshen has this history, but there is also an aspect to the community that had connected with your children and sort of illustrated that generational change can happen. I mean, it doesn't happen overnight, and things have been slow and tortuous in many ways, but your children grew up in a different Goshen from, say, 30, 50, 75 years before that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's ambiguity, ambivalence, ambiguity. That's the reality.
Thank you.
I think we might take one, maybe two questions here, depending on the responses, and then we will. I hope you'll give the grace of letting us wrap up, despite having many other questions and discussions that could take place yet this evening. But we do want to, be responsible to Art House and make sure we're getting out of here at a reasonable time, as well as leave at least a small window open for anyone that wants to come and talk to Dan and Leroy directly afterwards, and at least get a glimpse of some of the materials. So I see Evan, and I see this gentleman in the front.
I was just going to comment about if people are saying, why are we bringing up this old stuff and let's get over it and be done with it. Mennonites have been celebrating for 450, almost 500 years now, the terrors that their forefathers gone through. So, a few years of remembrance is certainly in order.
Thank you.
Are you aware of a racial tension in Goshen now? And I just want to say I have some neighbors, interracial couple, whose house was vandalized about a week or so ago.
I am, I I work an awful lot. I'm just consumed with day-to-day kinds of things, and I don't follow the news very much as I should. And no, I wasn't aware of any particulars. Okay, but I guess it doesn't surprise me, especially in this climate. Okay, I mean, I can recite some personal stories when my wife and I started to build our house, which is out to the west and south, on the southwest side of town. Some 43, 44 years, no, 45 years ago, that when we started building. And so the police, coming back from that, we went out on a Sunday to take a look at how the house was coming. I showed it to some friends of mine, a college classmate and his wife. And on the way back, I looked up and I saw on the rearview mirror a police officer, a Goshen City police officer, following me. And he followed me to the place where we were then living, which was a house that we were renting from Goshen College on College Avenue. And I saw him pass me by. And then I got on the phone and I called up the police department. I say, why were you following me? And he was honest and he told me, he said, we got a call saying that there was this black guy who was out there driving drunk. And so, I, those people who know me, really know me, know that I don't drink. And that's part of the reason why. But so that doesn't surprise me. What I try to do is be very careful, okay? And what I did try to teach especially my son, was to be very careful, all right? You always have to be. I grew up in the South when I was a couple of years younger than Emmett Till. And we, the black guys, about our age, didn't have to be reminded about who he was. We never forgot it. You listen to the guys who are my 75, 76, 77 years of age. They know who Emmett Till was. Because, especially those of us from the South. So, no, it doesn't surprise me. What shall we do about it? We must rely upon the police and authorities to be vigilant and to be fair. But that's part of this story, Had I, if I had been born in other circumstances, perhaps maybe I have sort of another place to live, another country to live in. But this is home. And, that's the way it is. The trouble is, the question is whether my grandchildren, will they see a different America? Perhaps they will. I hope that they will. But this is an ongoing saga. The United States, to make America great again, that is an illusion. Okay? It will never happen in that sense. It will only happen, as I've said before, if the United States can affirm itself, its own history, the good and the bad. If it can do that, if its people find within them to embrace that. I mean, I think the founders of this nation, ma'am, were insightful people. They were smart. I was thinking about that today. They were smart people. You couldn't, I mean, and here they were in this kind of synthetic experience. We're going to create a nation, man. I mean, it's going to, and they were bright, and they had all these great things, and Thomas Jefferson came out, and he was going to, I mean, and the Declaration of Independence. But then there was a caveat. Okay? It doesn't include black folks. And they tried to, and maybe a little over 100 years later, when it was 1789, then, no, not quite 100 years later, then the Supreme Court came out, is going to stamp it, and its approval is going to ratify this, and it all came apart. Okay? That is the tragedy. And so wise men, and women too, have come to embrace this idea of the American experience. It is broad, it is varied, it is diverse. And that is the lesson, if we learn it. I mean, I'll be 75 pretty soon. I'm looking over on the other side now, thinking about things which are to come. Okay? The question is the future. And amidst all of this technology, especially the technology of information, transformation, I mean, think about it. All of you gray hairs in there, you know, you're amazed at what's happening. But then lurking in back of all of that is that awesome technology of destruction. And that is the question, the big one. I tremble. I do. But like Barack Obama, I mean, he's a young man, and you know, when I listen to the guy like that, I'm ashamed of myself. You know, I really, this guy is something else. I mean, he has the ability to hope and to conduct himself as a man of hope does. He despairs, but we don't know about it so much. He's always hoping, and he's believing in America. That is the immigrant. That is the son of a father who came to this country, and a mother whose ancestors came to this country. And that is the stuff that makes me think hard and to continue to hope. And I hope that it's how do you say, when it's a disease that it's catching? Yeah, contagious, that's the word.
I think we'll.
Somebody else will go on. I'm sorry, I talked too long. I'm good.
Thanks again for your understanding and your patience here with us this evening. We will wrap up. Thank you very much, Leroy. Thank you very much, Dan, for your work and for sharing with us this evening.